The Democrat Party imports British Labour Party staffers to campaign in swing states. The road to a Republican Senate majority could run through the Midwest. And Allie Beth Stuckey will join us to explain how progressives use toxic empathy to push disastrous policies. We have those stories and so much more. Blaze News Tonight starts right now. Savage. Today is Thursday, October 17th. In a recent piece for Blaze News, FBI whistleblower Steve Friend wrote about the July 13th assassination attempt on Donald Trump, and he has an idea of what could have caused the Secret Service massive security failures. Here to break it all down is Matthew Peterson, editor-in-chief of Blaze News, and Steve Friend, who also co-hosts The Morning Post. So, Steve, thanks so much for joining us today. So, what institutional changes led to the biggest Secret Service blunder in decades?
Well, among many, I would attribute a large share of it to the 30 by 30 initiative that is taking and infecting law enforcement around the country by storm. And this is an initiative to get 30% female participation in law enforcement actually into leadership by the year 2030. And what we've had is the Department of Justice and Department of Homeland Security sign on to that initiative. And the problem is anytime that you prioritize immutable characteristics like the race of the person or the genitalia wagging between their legs over the quality of the candidate, by definition, your product will suffer. And we saw no greater failures there than on July 13th, when you had a couple of members of the protection detail who couldn't even holster their firearms there. So led me to go down a rabbit trail and look more into the 30 by 30 initiative, which I'd only seen some bared bones details of. And what I saw was pretty stark and concerning for me.
Steve, it sounds like what you're describing, I mean, this is a much larger problem. I mean, this is a national problem. That's what you're saying, right? That is affecting law enforcement throughout the nation.
It absolutely is. And even if you're not willing to sign on to it, the Biden-Harris DOJ will go after you for it. We recently saw that the DOJ is going after the city of South Bend, Indiana's police department for not essentially complying with this. So my question is, was Mayor Pete aware of it? Because apparently they're not going by the rubric of following that we have to have physical fitness tests that don't actually test your physical fitness. We have to have job knowledge tests that don't actually test your knowledge of the job, because apparently by the 30 by 30 initiative, those are discriminatory against females and minority candidates. And then there's also the cultural aspect to it, where the 30 by 30 initiative says things like you're homophobic or white culture when you're having qualities like valuing adherence to English common law or politeness or having a rigid time schedule, all things that are really paramount for a proper and effective law enforcement agency.
Well, we know that crime is all over the country right now, and Donald Trump was actually fact-checked for saying that crime is much worse than what the government admits. And there was a recent piece on Blaze News that revealed that the government actually changed, the FBI changed its crime statistics from 2022. They say it fell by 2.1%, but it actually went up by 4.5%. So how much of this data is the Bureau withholding? And I mean, what do you make of a story when you see the numbers are so egregious like this?
There's lies, damn lies, and FBI crime statistics at this point, because they use them one way or another to their best political advantage. They're not a law enforcement agency anymore. They're a secret police force, and they're a politicized, weaponized agency. So as it comes to this, they aggregate by statute. They're supposed to aggregate all the crime stats around the country so they can present them to the American people. But 30 to 31% of police departments around the country were not reporting to the FBI, and that included departments from Baltimore, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, these hotbeds of high crime rates. And the FBI was just sort of putting its finger in the air and guessing what it projected were those rates because they were politically convenient. Now, the local municipalities, the mayors, those police chiefs, they benefited by not reporting it because they aren't held accountable because crime is through the roof. And then the FBI took those stats that they made up at a whole cloth and brought them to the Biden-Harris administration. And then they was used for a fact check against Donald Trump, when we all know that crime is through the roof. And they do the exact opposite when it comes to terrorism. This was what I blew a whistle about. The FBI takes terrorism stats and either entraps individuals or does what they did with January 6th and creates hundreds and thousands of cases out of one particular incident because they want to juke those stats upwards. These stats mean nothing. They're just political narrative.
Steve, you speaking of entrapment, you uncovered another entrapment case this week, I believe. Can you tell us about that?
This is one of the most egregious ones that I've ever seen, and I've been looking at this for the last couple of years. The FBI essentially facilitated a young man at the age of 19 and groomed him, and arguably might have been looking at him before he actually reached the age of 18, and groomed him to go and join the Army. Now, my question then is, did they withhold the fact that they were assessing him before he went through that? Or did they actually collude with the DOD to get him into the Army ranks so that they could, across 6 fiscal years, keep an ISIS case open on him and then eventually entrap him and arrest him for providing material support to terrorism? And the issue here that really struck me was he was looking at ISIS at the age of 19 in 2019 because he's a young man. He doesn't know that ISIS was after the Trump administration put a kibosh on that in early 2017. So that to me indicates that he is actually a vulnerable person. And instead of sending somebody out to him and actually poking him and saying, hey, look, you're headed down a dark path. They're a mandatory first reporter. If he's emotionally disturbed, they have to bring that forward. But just say, look, I'm a consequence of that. But they didn't do that. The FBI now views American people as a target, as an opportunity. And they facilitated him joining the military so that they could then bring these charges against him. And never for a second thinking that, well, this guy's going to have access to live ammunition. He's going to be on a firing line during boot camp and during extensive other training. Maybe he's going to shoot another American soldier because he's just not with it. This is egregious, and it's just another example, very much like the way that they facilitated that arrival of that Pakistani across the border and let him operate within the interior. This trend is growing and it's getting out of control. It's putting innocent people at risk.
Well, Steve, that's my next question for you, because you uncover this case. You mentioned the Iranian that they brought across the border. How widespread are these entrapment cases, if not currently with the FBI, but you say it's going to be growing? How worried should Americans be about these cases?
Well, historically, they are out of control. I mean, you can go back 10 years, 2014, Project Salam, which comes from the political left, did an assessment of 400 FBI terrorism investigations and found that 396 of them, 99%, involved an individual who was not predisposed to engage in a terrorist act, not capable, wasn't able to, but for the involvement of the FBI. So they have a long track record of engaging on this. It's just that the target of it is different. They're always happy to go and get that ISIS case or Al-Qaeda case, but really they're going after their new prime target. That's the domestic violent extremist or the anti-government, anti-authority violent extremist, the agave who, by the definition of the FBI, is someone who has just a perception of government overreach or negligence, which I could think of 56 men who signed a Declaration of Independence who would find themselves in the crosshairs of an FBI domestic terrorism investigation today.
Steve, we're going to break it down a little bit later in the show, but I have to get your take on the Bret Baier interview with Kamala Harris last night while we have you here.
Well, I wish that he had those crime stats there to fact check her on it, but it clearly did not go well for the vice president. I was relieved to see finally a member of the journalist crew hold someone's feet to the fire, continue to stay over the target with her on it. And she flubbed because she's a word salad production machine, and it was there for the American people to see. And the only question is how much the Trump campaign is going to exploit that, because I think they should just take 30-second clips and snippets and point, I'm Donald Trump and I approve this message, and blast across the state of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, she did a lot of the hard work for the Trump campaign last night, that's for sure. Steve, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
When we come back up, BlazeTV host Allie Beth Stuckey will explain the consequences of toxic empathy next. We know what the second presidential debate exposed. Well, it's the terrible truth that the media, they're no longer just biased, but they're actually controlling the narrative. And Matthew, that's why here at Blaze Media, We want to take a stand against what we now call the state-controlled media, or what you describe as the legacy media, because we see all of the terrible things on the news and every single night, and there has to be a way to push back against it.
I mean, it's wild to think about the fact we live in a time in which we've seen the media go from being biased, right, to state controlled. I mean, just doing whatever leftist government tells them to do. So now we're at a point where the only way forward is to support and build the media and news apparatus we need that actually does the job. And that's what we're trying to do here every single day.
We have different tiers at Blaze Media that you can join, so you can find which one is right for you. But that's why we're offering also our biggest discount yet. It's going to be $40 off. Go to blazetv.com/Jill and use the code Jill40 and join the movement, because America deserves the truth. So at Blaze Media, we are here to deliver, and we want you to come along with us, because really we have to be building and pushing forward against this legacy media. So go to blazetv.com/Jill. Use the code Jill40 at checkout to join the movement.
Several years ago, I started paying attention to the tactics used by the left-wing media to get people, women in particular, on their side of an issue. They use what I call empathy shaming or empathy bullying. They present a victim, tell you their heart-rending story so that you have empathy for them, then attempt to convince you that the only kind, moral position to take is the progressive one.
And policies driven by empathy lead to terrible outcomes. It's the theme of Blaze TV host Allie Beth Stuckey's latest book, which is out now. It is called Toxic Empathy. And Allie, tell us what this means and where it comes from.
Yes, I started thinking about this concept a few years ago in the midst of the George Floyd riots and the craziness of COVID. It was an election year, and I looked around and I saw a lot of my fellow Christians, even those who call themselves conservative evangelicals, mimicking this very secular, progressive nonsense about BLM and white fragility. And when I would confront them as gently and as kindly as I could, trying to show them the truth, the data about some of the claims they were making, but also the biblical opposition to what they were saying, I kept on hearing this word over and over again. And I was actually told, it doesn't really matter what's true right now. What matters is that we are led with empathy, that we just have empathy. And I thought, gosh, if our empathy is leading us to a place where we are affirming lies, when we are supporting destructive policies like defunding the police or DEI initiatives that discriminate against white Americans, then we've gotten to a really bad place. And I noticed the same formula when it came to abortion, when it comes to illegal immigration, when it comes to gender, even when it comes to the definition of marriage, this empathy shaming or empathy bullying that exploits our compassion and coerces us to take the progressive position in the name of being moral and loving. So that's what this book is about. And I'm not only calling that out, I'm trying to show people how it works, what it looks like, and how we can refute it, both from a practical but also a biblical perspective.
Allie, tell us a little bit more about that, because one of the things that I think you are absolutely brilliant at is responding to it. Because the problem with what you call toxic empathy is that it's so hard for most people to respond to, right? Because the framework is set up to sound, you sound like a terrible person who doesn't care about the plight of person X. So how should people respond?
Yeah, so I start each chapter actually telling a story that you would see in the media from the left-wing perspective. And so, for example, in the abortion chapter, I tell the very gut-wrenching story of a mother in Texas who found out that her baby was only going to live for a few hours after birth. She wanted to have an abortion. Texas pro-life laws wouldn't let her. How NPR tells this story is that it was a horrible, terrible, painful labor, the pain of having to hold her dying daughter in her arms, the cost of paying for a funeral. And of course, the conclusion that they want us to come to is that these pro-life laws are cruel and that the pro-life laws are the source of this woman's pain. And if we just feel her pain, then we will be pro-choice. They don't come out and say just that, but of course, that's the conclusion that their empathy mongering is trying to lead you to. But what they do, and this is when empathy becomes toxic is they ignore the human being who is on the other side of this moral equation. And of course, that is the baby. So in every chapter, we do the same thing. We tell the heartrending story from the left-wing perspective. I want readers at the end of that story to be like, wait, maybe I am progressive. Maybe I do hold that position, but then I want to look at the cost on the other side. So then we go through, what would it have looked like if this woman had been able to have an abortion? Here's what happens in a second trimester abortion. Here's the pain that this baby would have felt. Rather than being held in her mother's arms as she took her dying breaths, she would have been dismembered and discarded like toxic waste. So this book isn't about dismissing our compassion or dismissing all of our feelings. It's about not allowing empathy to obscure reality and morality, to see the human cost of progressive decisions, and to ultimately ask ourselves, not just how do we feel, but what is true. So it's actually about deepening our love and then thinking a little bit harder about these issues that matter.
That's such an important dialogue that you're putting out there today. I saw one of your posts on X as well, talking about empathy and love. And I think it's pretty ironic. The progressives want you to think that they're interchangeable, but what do you say is the difference between the two?
Yes, they want you to think that empathy is love in the same way they want you to think that socialism is charity. It's just a lazy virtue. It's not real virtue at all. Just like they want to outsource their compassion to the government and say that they're generous, they want to say that empathy and love are the same, because empathy doesn't require sacrifice. Empathy just means feeling how someone feels. And that can be good or bad. It's really neutral. It depends on really where it leads you. But love seeks what is best for a person. And as a Christian, I say it seeks what is best for a person as God defines best. So that means even if I empathize with someone's pain who says, I was trapped in the wrong body, I don't feel like this is who I really am, I just want to be the real me, I can empathize with that distress and try to understand it. But if my empathy leads me to lie to them, if my empathy leads me to support them going into a woman's bathroom and then violating the rights of the women and girls in that space, if my empathy leads me to support policies that are affirming the lie that denies the gender binary or robs women and girls of their rights and privacy, that's when my empathy has become toxic. That's why love and empathy aren't the same. Love has to be rooted in truth. Empathy just feels how someone feels, and that's the big distinction.
Allie, your new book is Toxic Empathy. Where can people get that copy?
Yes, Toxic Empathy. Honestly, the best place to get it is on Amazon. I know we don't love Amazon, but a way to get back at Amazon is to buy Toxic Empathy. But you can also go to toxicempathy.com. There are different places that you can buy it. You can go to Hobby Lobby and some other bookstores that are also carrying it. But toxicempathy.com will definitely give you all that information.
Allie Beth Stuckey, thanks so much for the time.
Thank y'all very much.
When we come back, Chris Bedford will break down Kamala Harris's train wreck of an interview with Bret Baier next.
More than 70% of people tell the country is on the wrong track. They say the country is on the wrong track. If it's on the wrong track, that track follows 3.5 years of you being vice president and President Biden being president. That is what they're saying, 79% of them. Why are they saying that? If you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
And Donald Trump has been running for office.
But you've been the person holding the office.
Come on.
Madam
You
Vice
and I
President.
both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is that over the last decade,
But
people
you're the
have
lever
become.
of power.
But listen, over the last decade, it is clear to me, and certainly the Republicans who are on stage with me.
That personally was my favorite part of the interview last night. And if you watch that, you can see why Kamala Harris's aides reportedly tried to cut her interview short with Bret Baier. But the interview showcased Harris's platform so well that the Trump campaign posted it in its entirety in an ad. So here to break it all down for us is Chris Bedford, our senior politics editor. So Chris, what stuck out to you the most about that interview last night?
Well, Kamala Harris had to have a mission, right? When she went in there. I mean, say what you will, CNN and MSNBC like to look down their nose at Fox News, but of the cable stations, it has by far the most independent voting viewers, people who are not necessarily part of either party. So she needs to reach out to those viewers. She doesn't need to do more MSNBC or CNN interviews or New York Times interviews. Those voters are on lock for her if they're going to come out at all. Tonight or Wednesday night was a night where she was going to try and reach a new audience, and she completely failed to do that. So if you look at the moments that have been pulled from this interview, Democrats said that she did great. She held her own in the Fox den. Republicans said that was an incredible devastation of Kamala Harris. What an awesome night. The media is trying to hide the whole thing. They say, well, it's a Rorschach test. If you look at the ink blots, Republicans thought it went great. Democrats thought it went great. Okay, well, let's get out of the D.C. bubble and look at what independent voters would have taken away from that. And you don't actually see her convincing independents on anything. You see her doubling down on some of the left-wing policies and yelling about Donald Trump. And hey, if that strategy was going to work, then she wouldn't have had to have gone on Bret Baier in the first place. And another takeaway I got from that, Democrats claim that she did great, but they can't point to any moment where she was doing well. They don't have any clips of her dominating or being intelligent and pushing that stuff out. That clip that you just showed, Donald Trump put it on TikTok last night. It got 10.5 million views. I was just talking to someone in the campaign an hour ago. As of an hour ago, it was 10.5 million loops that it's had. That's reach far beyond just the people who are tuning into political news. That's taking these clips, and they've been doing this now for the 2-week media tour that she's been on, taking these little moments and sending them out to people, spreading them through social media in places where they otherwise wouldn't reach. And, it actually kind of makes me understand a little bit why Donald Trump is a little less gung-ho to get rid of TikTok, which is dangerous and run by the Chinese and bad for our kids. Well, it's because it's giving millions and millions of views to these sort of political clips way outside the normal audience and reaching people in a way that hurts Kamala Harris.
Listen, it's terrible, but the algorithm knows me better than I know myself. Now, illegal immigration is a huge topic. So let's listen to what Kamala Harris said last night about that.
Immigration is one of the key issues that they're looking at this election, and specifically the influx of illegal immigrants from more than 150 countries. How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration, because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
right
do you
now,
just a number? Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Bret, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have
it's a rough estimate of 6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get you the question. I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
See, that's what we saw so much of in the interview last night, Chris, was the two of them talking over each other, and she harkened back to, I'm not finished yet. Right? That was such a good moment for her in previous debates. She likes having that feeling. So what do you take away from that interaction?
So she showed up late to this interview. It was supposed to be 30 minutes. They wanted to constrict as much time as they could. So she showed up late and tried to get out of there early. So, and at the same time, Fox has lost a lot of credibility with a lot of viewers, and Bret Baier's got to go in there. He can't throw softballs. He needs to actually get answers. He needs to get some of the more Trump supporters who feel like they've been done wrong by Fox in the past interested in viewing again. So he's got to hit hard. And he's going to go and he's going to be firm and he's going to be polite because he's a professional. And that's what you sort of saw there. And Kamala Harris kept on trying to steer away from the question because, of course, no candidate wants to acknowledge how many crimes have been committed, and especially when it's in the millions and millions under her administration. But she couldn't get away. She couldn't explain. And I noticed exactly what you're talking about there. She kept on trying to get that lean-in kind of feminist point in, the I'm still talking, the yet she persisted, etc. And it just didn't work. And another thing that really stuck out to me is just how much Mitch McConnell and Lankford screwed over the Republican Party with their walking into what was so obviously a trap for the GOP. And I was here on Capitol Hill. Conservative senators, conservative House members were screaming from the rafters. Listen, if you try to do this amnesty deal with the Democrats and try to tie the Trump administration's hands while at the same time granting amnesty and putting more border processors down on the border, not even cops or enforcement, then you are walking into a trap that will be used over and over again. And if you see over the last couple of weeks, things like Project 2025, which we were talking about a lot at the beginning of the show, Democrats don't talk about it anymore because it wasn't true and it never actually rang with the voters. No one cares. But they're still sticking with the McConnell immigration deal talking point because that actually is getting results from voters. And you heard that again last night.
She wanted to lean in, and she did lean in over and over again and finally fell over. And that's very interesting. But what's the fallout? Do you think, I mean, your take at the beginning here was, look, this isn't going to move the dial with independents. You know, she didn't win anyone over, which I think is definitely true. Do you think there's any other negative repercussions? I mean, how does it propel the, campaign forward? Are they going to do more interviews after this? Was this the game over moment that a lot of people on the right said it was last night?
No, the game is not over, especially when you're going up against a candidate who has raised $1 billion, or was it $3 billion? I can't even recall anymore, since she's launched her campaign. When you've got that much of an arsenal, you're able to direct ads in places and now all over Pennsylvania. The game is certainly not over. And despite the fact that you'll hear Republicans repeatedly list off all the swing states that they're winning in, you often hear them kind of just mumble through Pennsylvania. That's because they're tied, or sometimes she's even winning in Pennsylvania. And if they do not win Pennsylvania, the Republicans will not win the White House. So that's actually still an important piece that is in play here. But the Democrats are desperate. That's why you saw this play in the first place. They weren't even doing any interviews a little over 2 weeks ago. Now they're going on Bret Baier and going in for that lashing. That shows you that they're desperate. And if this doesn't change the polls in the right way, and it won't, they're going to get more desperate. So I actually have my column coming out. I won't cannibalize too much of it. Coming out in the Beltway Brief tomorrow morning. We can talk about it in the show tomorrow of, I think, a pretty big showdown on the Democratic Party that is coming and is going to happen if this trajectory continues.
I can't wait. I'm so excited for the Beltway Brief, which you can, by the way, go ahead and sign up for that as well at theblaze.com/Bedford. I'll make sure that people sign up for you, Chris, because your writing is so good every week, and they can tell just by watching you on the show. But there is something that it's not the Democrats, but it's kind of the Democrats that's going on, because there's nearly 100 staffers actually from the Labor Party. They were brought over to the United States to campaign in battleground states, and it's all funded by the Labor Party. So I have a big question, right? We fought a war. We shouldn't be involved in this anymore. Britain's over there. We are over here. So why is Britain getting involved in this election?
Oh, because they're all part of the globalist elite. They're all on the same team. Globalism, globalism, globalism. And this is it. And you see it all over. The Democrats have done this for years. I think it was Barack Obama sent Jim Messina and a couple other folks from his top campaign advising cabinet over to help advise in elections to knock Benjamin Netanyahu out of power in Israel, which was an unheard of level of public meddling. Allies always go back and forth quietly meddling in each other's internal politics, but it's become more brazen and more public. And the Labor government does not see any friend in Donald Trump, and they see a friend in trying to back Joe Biden, or excuse me, Kamala Harris. But how is that going to help you? I mean, if you're in Pennsylvania or Georgia, you're annoyed if someone from California knocks on your door and tells you who to vote for. Is an English accent actually going to help? I think that'll make it worse. And of course, I actually talked to some folks in Congress today who are looking into the legality of this. Were there contributions from the Democratic Party? Was this entirely paid for by a foreign government? Is this an in-kind contribution from a foreign government to an American campaign? Those rules are strict. Those rules are so strict that my Scottish cousins asked me to bring over MAGA hats in 2016 as a wedding gift because they weren't allowed to buy them on the website because they're foreigners. I brought over a bunch. They put them right on in the airport. Glaswegians are made different. But if they broke the law here, well, they may be in some trouble.
We like these cousins. We like these cousins a lot, and I want to meet them someday.
They're great people.
Riddle me this. We're sitting here, right? Let's be real. I'm sitting here today, and I'm sort of pacing back and forth, thinking, There is not much time left before the big day, the big show that everyone's been waiting for 4 years. And right now, things are oddly calm, right? I mean, yeah, it's contentious, whatever. The news cycle is oddly calm the last few days. And the trend is definitely, as you've been saying, that the bottom is sort of falling out for Kamala. So, you really wonder, this is October, the month of surprises. Are there going to be any surprises between now and Election Day? Because right now, it looks like, smooth sailing, clean shot. But then again, that might be Charlie Brown running at the football again. That's what's in the back of everyone.
We know we can't have nice things, Chris. We know it.
I know. That sense of dread that you kind of had during the convention is starting to come back and say, what weirdness is going to happen? The assassination attempt was survived. What's next? And I get that same feeling as well. Talking to some folks just earlier this week, the kind of wonder was, have the Democrats used every October surprise they have? I mean, they've literally tried to put Donald Trump in prison. Like, they've used every trick they possibly can. They're still coming at him. You've got judgments potentially coming, but do the American people care? I mean, it reminds me of 2016 when Donald Trump, who was a world-famous guy, the Democrats tried to paint him as being rich and a womanizer. Like, that's baked into the cake. Everyone knew that about Donald Trump. No one was surprised about that. And they keep on just doubling down on this, trying to find something new. So far, there's got to be something out there, right? I feel it somewhere, but they've used every single card in the deck. What else is left? They've literally now tried to kill him twice. And by they, I just mean, the broader people here. I'm not any conspiratorial group in the closet. But what else could possibly come? Well, this has been an exciting season of election year.
I hope that's not a tease for what's about to come in the next week. If it is, I'm blaming the two of you. But Bedford, thanks so much. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
See you then.
Some Senate Democrat incumbents are losing steam against their Republican challengers. We'll tell you which races to watch next. We're 19 days away from the election. So can Republicans take back the Senate in less than 3 weeks? According to Len Foxwell, a Democratic strategist, the Midwest might be a key for these races. Here to discuss is Justin Robert Young. He's the host of Politics podcast. So Justin, what do you think? Which Senate seats do you think that the Republicans could actually pick up in this cycle?
Well, I think that this is the most favorable Senate map that the Republicans have had in a very, very long time. And they're going to be very regretful if they don't put a lot of points on the board when election night and however long it takes afterward to count the votes is said and done. But that being said, I believe that the Republicans have control of the Senate just by the fact that Tim Sheehy in Montana is looking like he has a pretty safe lead over John Tester, and you have Jim Justice and his dump truck of a dog in West Virginia that is going to boat race any Democrat that runs against them. So that's the Senate right there. But when you really look at the padding, when you want to put more of a gap between it, Bernie Moreno, morning consult poll came out today that has not been favorable to Republicans at all in those Senate races, had him up over incumbent Sherrod Brown. That's very, very big. And then the other two are Eric Hovde in Wisconsin, and Mike Rogers and the Pennsylvania Senate seat where Bob Casey is the incumbent. It looks like McCormick has been running very, very close in that race. The big question is, will there be ticket splitting on a heretofore unseen level? Because the polling shows Donald Trump doing very well, if not leading in some of those states, but the Senate candidates running in some polls anywhere between 8 and 10 points behind, at least up till now.
Justin, I'm curious. We were talking yesterday with someone about the funding issue and the disparity really between, Republicans and Democrats and how much money is, put out there. And I think when you look back at the midterms, it really is mind blowing how many people were outspent by Democratic candidates. This time around, what do we see in terms of funding? I mean, I know Ted Cruz was, I think, on with Glenn Beck today complaining, I'm getting $0 from Mitch McConnell and his war chest. What does the scene look like? Is it any different than last time around?
No, it really hasn't. The Republican Senate candidates have been outraised, as they were by the Democrats last time. And this is another problem with candidate selection as well. So Ted Cruz, for example, who I do think is running at a pretty comfortable lead in front of Colin Allred, at least now with the polls in aggregate, is among the most well-known people in politics, let alone the Senate. So he's not going to have a problem with name ID in Texas. But what you've seen in the post-Trump era is that you've had a lot of candidates that have come either new to politics or politicians that have never won statewide before. So say whatever you will about Bernie Moreno and McCormick and Hovde and Rogers, none of them have ever won statewide in the states that they are running in right now. And when you really talk about what you need money for, it's that. It's name ID. Because especially when you're polling, you're going to say, oh, well, this person's name I've heard before because they're the incumbent senator. This person I've never heard of. So why would I vote for Bernie Moreno if I've never heard of a Bernie Moreno before?
All right, so that's the Senate. Let's take a look at the House races right now. Is there anything spicy out there? Is there anything going on in House races that you think could have a very big impact?
I'll tell you what. I think that if the Republicans win the House, and if Donald Trump wins the presidency, I would expect the Republicans to win the House, that we might look back at the big events that Donald Trump just ran in Coachella, California, and the MSG rally that he's going to do at the end of this month as the reason why the House is going to turn on contested seats in blue states, in my opinion. Obviously, you have a lot of these seats that are in the swing states, and those are already spoken for. You already have so much money and so much attention that's going to be trying to push these various seats wherever in terms of Republican and Democratic influence. But in California, in Southern California, in some of those seats in New York, which essentially is the only reason why the Republicans had their slim majority in the House during the midterms, which did not go the way that they wanted to. It was New York that made the difference there. And so I wonder if this is rosy for Republicans after Election Day. You might look at that MSG rally and say, well, wow, that was a big in-kind contribution from the Trump campaign, which is been a little bit, maybe at times, not exactly hand in glove with the Republican Party writ large.
Justin, that is one of the better points that I've heard about those rallies from what anyone's saying, and it's very true, right? I mean, the only bright spot in those states, in those one-party states, is really for the right, is what you see happening in these recalcitrant and even growing, right, rebellious House districts. So that makes a ton of sense. I actually am curious. I want you to go back to history a little bit. Jill was just telling me before the show about this history podcast we're both interested in. You apparently have some thoughts on the 1960s elections and how they relate to what's going on today.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked about it. So, it's called Raise the Dead. I've done 2 seasons of it, one focusing on the 1960 election between Kennedy and Nixon and the 1964 election of Goldwater and Johnson. It started after 2016 when I've always been fascinated with the 1960 election, largely because we don't talk about it a lot. And it's odd to me because 2 of the most famous presidents of all time ran against each other. It also is something that has a lot of seeds of where we've come. And that's what I focused on in Raise the Dead, was really comparing the Kennedy campaign in 1960 to Donald Trump's campaign in 2016, where I think that there are a lot of hallmarks in terms of where I think deliberate hallmarks that the initial Trump 16 campaign looked to pattern from the Kennedy campaign. Probably the biggest, and I think the most undeniable, was taking advantage of new media. The new media at the time in 1960 was television. Not only was the JFK campaign one of the first private owners of a VCR, that was new tech at the time, but they also pioneered the concept of editing down Kennedy's speeches into 1 minute, 30-second, and 15-second clips that they would voluntarily mail to television stations specifically tailored to the kind of word that they wanted to get out in those specific areas. That didn't happen before. It's now standard practice. Well, now less standard practice because people don't send videotapes, but it used to be, especially through the 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s, just what every campaign did. Similarly, you had a lot of hallmarks to the Nixon campaign, to the Clinton campaign, especially with some really, really head-scratching decisions on where they were going. But yeah, that's raised the dead.
It's incredible. And of course, Nixon going on to have a young Roger Ailes tell him he needs to pay more attention to TV. And then he does and becomes the master of it. But I would argue not the master of digital, right? Fox Nation is not quite where maybe it ought to be. I want to before we have to leave you. I want to make sure that we get at least your basic take on what the heck you think is going to happen in the next few weeks.
Whew, I'll tell you what, I am generally a default to the norms guy. Like, I think that politics is a lot of noise. It's a lot of trying to shape the narrative. And so you just want to look at basic trend lines. And the basic trend line here is that this is an extraordinarily close election that will likely be decided by less than a point in the states that really, really matter. So you start looking in the margins and you start looking at how the campaigns are operating. Right now, I see one campaign in Donald Trump that is operating with nearly supreme confidence. They are picking and choosing where they are going. They are running these gigantic rallies that are going to get massive press attention in unconventional areas because Donald Trump wants to project himself as a unifying candidate that is unafraid to go anywhere. And then you have the Harris campaign, which seems to be throwing a lot at the wall. It doesn't seem like they are confident with where they are. They are moving television ad buys from Wisconsin into Pennsylvania. That doesn't seem like they are comfortable with where they need to be. They're throwing out new plans like their economic opportunity plan for black men that came out on Monday, which was a bit of a head scratcher. So I think it's close. Anybody could win it. But if you are just looking at how these campaigns are operating, one of them sure seems like they are winning and the other seems like the exact opposite.
Justin, tell everybody where they can find you.
Politics.com is where you can get my podcast, 2 free episodes each and every week. We got a great episode coming up this week. The moderator from that Ted Cruz and Colin Allred debate, Jason Whiteley of WFAA, is on the program. And we also have a PAC that is playing both sides of one of the most divisive issues in America. They are running Kamala is pro-Israel ads in Dearborn, Michigan, and they are running Kamala is pandering to the anti-Semite ads in the Jewish suburbs of Pennsylvania. All on PX3 that is coming out tomorrow.
All in one episode. Justin, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
When we come back, we'll leave you with a little bit more of the insights for the November election. Don't go anywhere. We are 19 days away from the election, and Matthew Peterson, when we look at it, there is so much to take away from just today's show, right? Today's show could be an entire week's worth of shows in any other time.
Yeah, I mean, you see everything here from, hey guys, it looks like the Republicans are going to win all of it, to, wow, there's some really bad stuff happening out there and the FBI is lying to us.
Yeah, Justin Robert Young, when we had him on, he said this is the most favorable map for the Senate that Republicans could look at. He said West Virginia is basically a gimme. And so if you get that and one more, or just that plus a Donald Trump victory, the Republicans own the Senate again.
Yeah, and that is the happiest case possible. That's what people have been worried about for a long time. And certainly all the signs show that this is very much within reach right now. And then you would have, the whole ball game, folks, right? I mean, don't get me started how most of those people in the Senate on supposedly my side vote, but this is remarkable. That would be the biggest win possible.
Well, we started the show with talking about Kamala Harris and the interview that she had last night with Bret Baier and how Steve Friend said, the Donald Trump campaign should just be clipping off 30 seconds and saying, I'm Donald Trump and I approve this message. And then with Justin on the show, we get the historical perspective of it with JFK from the 1960s election. We dropped the word VCR back on the show today. I didn't see that coming out on the show today, but he said how he used to go out and send and mail clips of his interviews from a minute long, 30 seconds, 15 seconds long. So it was like the social media clips before the social media clips ever were allowed.
Yeah, and as you were saying, the break, I mean, it's like TikTok right now would be the equivalent. So this is really important stuff to realize, because people get these fancy ideas, just with all those speechwriters in DC, right, about how they're making Ciceronian, speeches. And the fact is, since TV started, you realized right away you had to condense what you were saying and make sure it was good TV, which is just a different medium. It's not the same as speaking to a crowd of people, right? Which is what Trump does, right? For a long period of time. That's old school, like because the energy is different. You're actually there live and you're entertaining them and you're speaking directly to them. On TV, what makes for good TV is, you need your sound bites, right? You want the clips. You want that moment that that's gonna go viral. And so that's heightened in a digital environment where all of a sudden Trump needs to put those clips on TikTok, God forbid, and the Chinese communists who own it. But all of a sudden, he's got millions of people watching these clips of Kamala looking like the idiot she is, because that's using the medium correctly.
And the Joe Rogan experience is still floating out there. Now, we know Donald Trump is going to do it. Last night, though, after watching Kamala Harris battle it out with Bret Baier, I don't know if I have much faith. I mean, again, from a purely journalistic standpoint, from a purely entertainment standpoint on the right, I would hope that she does it. But 3 hours is a long time.
So if we can believe Bret Baier, and there were 3 or 4 aides going, "Stop the tape, stop what's going on," right? At this one, I mean, when it gets to Rogan, like, you could just see even more dangerous territory, because even though it wouldn't be, he wouldn't be going into like the details of policy or whatever, it could be even way worse for her if she starts to stumble with like real world, this is who you are stuff after sitting there for an hour.
Well, and it was almost, to use football term, like icing the kicker, he said, where her team was out there and, she was supposed to show up at 5 o'clock and she didn't. And then they knew, though, that the time restrictions that they had to turn it around, because what they were going to do was record it live, play it back in its entirety. And for them to do that, like, she had to be sitting down in the seat by like 5:15. Well, she strolls in at 5:17 is what Bret Baier said. She's trying to make it so, okay, you're on the defensive now. You're already not comfortable. And then her aides are reportedly the ones saying, "Oh, no, please stop this," at the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, once she got past her sort of talking points, right, all of a sudden you get these big stumbles. And even with all the gamesmanship in the world, it did not work. And I don't think it will work. So, I mean, there's I'm with all these people on Twitter saying, please go do Rogan. That would be excellent.
Now, we know that Chris Bedford is cool, but I think that we learned that his Scottish cousins might be cooler today, as they were the ones that were requesting the MAGA hats and put them on immediately in the airport as soon as Bedford brought them over.
For some reason, I thought this was like a cozy fall fire sort of side chat story, bringing the Scottish cousins the MAGA hats. That was pretty good stuff, I have to say. I'd like to meet them.
But like a cool, all right, we're waiting for the other shoe to drop, though, right? We are in this period of relative calm.
Yep.
Will it last?
Yeah, I think this is the thing everyone's asking right now. We are now really close, and October is the month of surprises. So what the heck is going to happen next? Hopefully nothing, and this keeps going. But I know a lot of people who are very alert right now in this industry.
We're just going to take it for what it is. We're going to call this a win at this point in time. And you know what? We'll come back tomorrow and break it all down for you. Be sure to subscribe to Blaze News Tonight on your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget to rate and review the show. It helps everybody else to go find it. We'll see you back here tomorrow.